Hello, everyone. So excited for today's podcast with Katie Lianza of Quiet Mind, Wild Heart. She's an MBSR practitioner, I would say, right?
Coach.
Coach. MBSR coach, which is an acronym for mindfulness-based stress reduction, which we'll be getting into along with how to weave in mindfulness to parenting, which I personally am really curious about. Sitting here in my third trimester, I'll be taking lots of notes. But before we dive in, how are you? How's your spring starting?
I'm great. I'm so happy to be here. This is so exciting.
So fun.
Cool. My spring is really awesome. I just feel like I'm kind of exploding into spring, which is really fun. I was looking at my plants this morning. I planted all my seeds on the spring equinox, and everything is coming up. These little tiny plants of growth, and it's just like, okay, it's happening. We're
Yeah.
rounded the corner.
I know. So symbolic, right? I love the energy that comes along with spring. It's so rejuvenating. Definitely gearing up for garden season. I'm determined to get it planted before the baby comes so that
Yes.
we can have it once baby's here, eating from the garden, all that good stuff. But
Yeah. I have a 4 and a 5-year-old, and my 4-year-old is very reluctant with vegetables. But the only place he'll eat them is if he can go into the garden and pick it himself. So he's got like a really great month of eating vegetables throughout the year,
yeah,
and then I'm just trying to.
like 1 out of 12. I'll take it. Oh my gosh, that's amazing. Well, no better source, I guess, than straight from the garden. So that's a plus. But yeah, so excited you're here. And I wanted to really just dive in. I always love to start off by talking about more your personal story about what led you into mindfulness-based stress reduction, or what nudged you in that direction, the experiences that brought you there. I think is really cool to hear. So let's start there,
Yeah.
if you don't mind.
No, absolutely. So I love telling this story because I have a lot of practice with it. I just did long story short for NPR, and when I was on, it was all about kind of my journey to get to a place where I am now. So when I was
I don't know why I feel like you have a good NPR voice for some reason.
oh.
It sounds right.
I'm so honored. And my NPR cool is like my cool. So it's like I love hearing that. So I'm 40. So when I was 25, I was living out in California, and I was teaching high school English and skiing. I taught out in Tahoe, and it was amazing. I loved it out there. And I was working really hard. I was just like, oh my gosh, I was so stressed. I was so stressed to the point where it was like, I don't know if I should say this on, but I could barely poop. I was so stressed out. And
Yeah. That really downregulates the digestion, right?
It was wild. It was wild how I just didn't have any strategies. And I had this kind of feeling in my heart that what I was doing wasn't enough. And it was like I was always feeling like I was chasing the next mountain. I was trying to do the next thing. It was just like it never was filling my soul, even though it was like I was doing a lot. And so then I decided to join the Peace Corps. And when I went over there was so many layers of it. You know, it was the best and hardest time of my life.
Mm-hmm.
And when I got home from that, I thought that that was going to be where I felt like it was enough. And I had proven to myself that I was doing these things that were like making this world a better place and this bigger change. But what I really felt was this constant anxiety, this constant just like hole inside. And then I started going inward to try to figure out like, okay, I have checked all the boxes of the accomplishments that I thought were going to be the things that would fill me.
Mm-hmm.
And I was still just this like this emptiness. So that's when I started getting into meditation. And that brought me into a place of feeling whole and being able to quiet myself and to recognize that maybe the thoughts that was having didn't define me, and that I could listen to it, but it didn't have to control me. And so I started bringing that into my classroom with my students, and learning more about social and emotional learning. I took some really cool classes just to bring more kindness into how we treat each other and how to create more of a community. And then that brought me to mindfulness-based stress reduction, and just the teacher inside of me wanted more of a way to structure it where it was really showing how to unpack stress and some strategies on how to manage it in a tangible way. And so that
Mm-hmm.
is how I started my business, as I became trained on mindfulness based stress reduction. And then now I'm here talking to you.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. That deeply resonates with me, the idea of checking things off a list and doing, but there's no counterbalance with being and presence. And so it isn't fulfilling when we just continue to check things off a list and move the goalpost. There's no sense of appreciation for the accomplishments as they're happening. I am so guilty of that myself. And something I talk to clients about all the time, because they are often like, oh, well, I'm not as far along as I want to be here. Like, I'm not losing as much weight as I want here. Or this isn't here. I'm like, yes, but you forgot to look at everything you've done and all the progress you've made. And you have to kind of celebrate yourself along the way. Otherwise, it is just this endless pursuit of achievement, which
Mhm.
is really just such masculine energy, but there's no feminine balancing it. That's when it kind of gets a little imbalanced.
Yeah, the contentment is really difficult. It's really difficult to find if you are not conscious of it, and
Mm-hmm.
and it's like we can always look back 5 years ago and be like, oh, why wasn't I thankful for what I had achieved or how I looked or the relationships
Mm-hmm.
that I had? Like, why didn't I see that in the moment? Because now I can look back at these pictures and be like, man, why was I still beating myself up? And it's like, we can just always reflect back on that past self, and it's like being able to realize that the only thing that we can really control is the present moment, and
Mm-hmm.
being able to have that perspective in the present moment, like, what a gift.
Right. Present gratitude instead of reflective gratitude. How often do you do that with pictures? You're like, oh my God, I was so hot then, but I still thought I needed to lose weight or this or that, or
Mhm.
like that was such a good trip that I went on, or all of
Mhm.
these memories that I created and didn't realize that was such a beautiful time of my life at that moment. And so,
Mhm.
what a gift to give yourself to be able to find that gratitude as things are happening.
Mhm. Yeah.
I do think that our culture is very achievement oriented. So it's hard to kind of be still with yourself sometimes and realize that being still actually helps to promote more achievement sometimes in a more efficient way when you can I always say slow down to speed up, because when we're just doing, sometimes it's not even aligned really. We're just producing. Whereas when you slow down, it's almost like the steps that you take when you're moving are more intentional and therefore like more aligned and more efficient and more effective and coming from a nurtured space as opposed to like a depleted space.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So good. Well, tell me, okay, two things. I want to know how you came up with your business name for
Mm.
starters. And I also wanted, I just guess, a brief explanation of mindfulness based stress reduction for people who haven't heard of the concept before. So you can
Mhm.
start with either one. You pick.
So, my business name is Quiet Mind, Wild Heart. And I came up with it on a women's backpacking trip.
Mm.
So we were hiking, we did Mount Isolation, and it's a really amazing trail because there's this, a lot of it is kind of this flat, you're following a riverbed, and as we're following this riverbed we're finding like all this moose scat along the way. And I was with my best friend Tracy, who she owns Mountain Heart Wellness, and
Mm.
um she's absolutely wonderful. And so we started kind of spitballing things back and forth to each other. And there's this Mary Oliver quote, or poem, called Wild Geese. I don't know if you've ever heard it before, but there's this one part about that you just have to listen to, and I'm going to misquote it, but it's really about like listening to like your soul, and to, not really. I want to read you the poem. Can I read you the poem? I'm an English teacher. I'm sorry. I'm
Yeah,
just reading it really quick. Okay.
go for it.
So,
Do it up. Google that.
I know
Google that shit.
it's
This
my,
is the beauty of the internet.
here's the poem. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and the deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese, high in the clean blue air, are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over, announcing your place in the family of things.
Mm, love it.
So for me, when I read that and I feel it in my heart, it's really telling us that we're all human, and that we all have this calling for something more in this collective spirit. And I really feel that in my soul with mindfulness, and mindfulness based stress reduction, and that it can quiet people so they can hear a higher calling.
Yeah. Yes. I know. I love that. The counterbalance of quiet and wild and getting quiet so you can hear the kind of unique urges of your soul, that we get that are muffled often from
Mm.
just daily living on autopilot, being distracted, self medicating, which is something I can definitely relate to with feeling.
Mm.
I actually feel like with my own kind of self medication with drinking that I was doing it to ignore the calling of my soul because I wasn't ready to step up to my purpose. And so it was like a catch 22, and I think all of us have our different ways in which we can suppress leading more soul driven lives, because it is scary to kind of embrace your purpose or a life that feels meaningful,
Yeah.
especially when a lot of people don't. And it can be easy to just get stuck in the grind, and it seems like you have to step apart a little bit to find your path individually, and that can be really intimidating.
It can be really intimidating. It can be really intimidating. And I like to think, I like to think about, like, it's a little cliche, but a butterfly, right? When
Mhm.
you have to cocoon and turn into literal goo.
Yeah.
And then after the goo, it's like then you can break open um and I just learned something about butterflies, that their migration patterns, it's ancestral. So they will there's they'll stop and go around things that aren't there anymore, but it's like they've been taught this from past generations. It's like it's all there inside of us. It's just that we have to.
Yeah, waiting, dormantly. I know it is a cliche, but I think it's very fitting as well because it seems still, but there's so much happening beneath the surface, and that is so parallel to mindfulness, and kind of the increasing awareness that you gain is so transformational, but it really requires a lot of stillness and like introspection, which can
Mhm.
seemingly look like you're self-isolating or different ways of being still or alone. And I always say that too with people who are newly like alcohol free or that I work with personally, is the like embrace the cocoon phase, because it feels a little daunting, but it doesn't last forever, and it's almost kind of a good intermediary. Sometimes you have to like quiet the chatter.
Yeah, and reestablish yourself, right? And like what yourself is in that moment.
Yes, 100%. So tell
Mhm.
me, okay, what if you were to just say to somebody who's never heard of mindfulness based stress reduction before, how would you explain it?
Yeah. Okay. So, I want to define mindfulness first. So mindfulness is noticing your thoughts, feelings, and physical sensations in the present moment without judgment.
Mm,
So it's not that you are always feeling, I think that sometimes people think of meditation as like somebody sitting in this like glowing orb around them. And that's not really what it is. I mean, sometimes it can be that, but mostly it's taking the time to feel the feels and let them pass through. And I, so and sometimes that's hard to do, but when we it's kind of like the same idea as going to the gym or going for a run. It's like some days are going to be good runs, and some days are you're going to slog through it, but
yeah.
you still do it because you know that when you get to the other side of it, it's like you worked through something. And it's the same thing with mindfulness, right? So some days we can quiet and it would just really just be in the moment, and other days it's like you're kind of just like sorting things that you've been pushing away and ignoring. And I think I'm a very Google Calendar person. I don't know, I
Mm,
like live and
mm,
die for my Google
me
Calendar.
too.
So I think that it's that same idea of like you're giving yourself space to be like, no, I'm not going to let my mind wander all day. I'm not going to just let this chatter all day long. I'm going to give myself a direct amount of time to say, no, 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 not now. I have this space for you to do that, to sort through the work, to sort through those thoughts. And this is when I'm going to do it on a daily basis. And so you can kind of let it be like, okay, that's when I'm going to let it bounce all around and let it settle. And so then in other moments of your day, it can be more present, or, present moment awareness.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a great point to highlight, is that mindfulness is something that can take shape in the form of intentional meditation, but it can also kind of be like a state of being throughout your day, right? To kind of circle back to the present moment and just reminding yourself to be present with how you're feeling, what you're thinking, and taking on more of an observatory role rather than identification or judgment role.
Yeah.
And then would it be accurate to say like there's more practices than meditation as well? Like you can employ mindfulness in a multitude of practices, journaling, breath work, nature walks, whatever.
Yeah.
So it's like not one size fits all. It's kind of discovering your path and what resonates with you.
Yeah, and so there's a lot with mindfulness-based stress reduction where it's about, it's there is formal meditation, but there's also a lot about informal, or it's like formal practice and informal practice, right? And so that informal practice is like it can be, and I'm going to move this into us talking about motherhood, because like
Mm-hmm.
that is a point where there can be a lot of anxiety that happens, where it's just like your brain is going a million miles a minute, because we also are like adding so many more things onto our plate. We talk about the quiet agenda of being a mom, and it's like you just don't even realize how many more things you have to think about on a daily basis. And so when we can weave in informal practice, it can be it's not adding to your plate. It's saying, when I'm washing the dishes, I can use my informal practice to really be there to wash the dishes. And when I am doing tummy time, I'm being there in the moment to do tummy time. It's not me thinking about a million other things that I have to do. So it's kind of like it's creating that space for you to be able to soak in what's happening around you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just a constant return to presence.
Mm-hmm.
And I also feel like for me, and what I notice is when I do have intentional meditation, it helps me to find that space in an informal way more frequently throughout the day and
Mm-hmm.
remind myself. Whereas, like, when I get away from an intentional meditation practice, even if it's just a few minutes every morning, it's a completely different mode that I'm operating in. That's much more um, detached and on autopilot. And it's so wild how like quickly you move away from being in a state of mindfulness when you aren't practicing regularly, and whether it's intentional or informal. But all that to say that the intentional practice for me really helps the informal practice throughout the day, this way that I operate. And so, okay, speaking of motherhood, and I definitely want to pick your brain about this topic because I feel like the idea of mindfulness and motherhood is something a lot of people would probably laugh at. But what I really am drawn to you about is how down to earth you are. And even when we first met, just talking about motherhood, you were hilarious. And I think it's really nice for people to see that mindfulness, it's not an all or nothing approach. It can be integrated in a realistic, down to earth way. Like, how do we embrace some of these concepts that help us to become better parents without like having unrealistic ideals of what it looks like in execution? And
Mm-hmm.
so, yeah, I wanted to dive in there a little bit. But first, I wanted to say, like, I know you work with kids, you have two kids that are young and close in age. So, in your work with kids, how do you see, like, I know you do a mindfulness club and a nature club, and you teach. And so, how do you see mindfulness benefiting children? And why do you feel like it's important to kind of get kids going with mindfulness at an early age?
Yeah. Well, I want to bring it back to my experience. I had one teacher in seventh grade
Mm-hmm.
who brought us through a like full body scan.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it was the only exposure I had as a kid to that. And I mean, I hung on to that one body scan of like, when I'm laying in bed at night, and I mean, my mind would be going a mile a minute. I would just be like pinging in 100 directions. I could feel it in my body, and I wouldn't know how to get myself to sleep. And so that one that one thing that she did for us, I used that all the way through middle school, high school, college. It would be what I would be able to ground myself with.
Mm-hmm.
And I think about that so often because that was kind of ahead of the times for when, in the 90s, like there weren't a lot of educators that were doing that. And I'm like, oh my gosh, Miss Kent, like, thank you so much for giving that to me. And so now I think about that with, with my kids, with my students. It's like they're just these little balls of energy and they've got so much emotion. Like their kids are amazing because they're so raw. Like everything about them is like the joy, the sorrow, the anger, like it's just everything is so intense. And I say this to my husband all the time. I'm like, our superpower is that we can control our emotions, and their frontal cortex,
I'm
they
like,
don't
speak for yourself. No,
in
I'm just kidding.
theory, right, our brains are developed enough that we, in theory, um
Oh, that's funny.
and it's like, it's not like I don't lose my shit. I still lose my shit. Like everybody loses it, like
Yeah.
that's not it. It's that to have that perspective of being able to bring ourselves back to it and being like, okay,
Hmm.
we can still heal this. Like I can still show my process. And so I do, like with my kids, like with my 4 and 5 year old, and then also with my students, like we do the breathing, we do like we talk about emotional development, we process, but what I have found that works best, and I think for most people, it's modeling.
Hmm.
So, I can talk till I'm blue, but it's the kind of the same thing as like teaching kids how to say please and thank you, right? Like it's not the say please, like that's not what's going to teach kids gratitude. It's it's modeling gratitude, it's showing kindness, it's constantly, it, just like in your language, and showing like this is how I want to move through the world, and I hope this is how you want to move through the world too, because these are the benefits and this is what it shows. And so like I lose my shit, and then I'll say I am feeling, I am like, I'll tell them how I'm feeling. I'm feeling my chest tighten up. I'm feeling the blood pumping through the veins in my neck right now. Like I can feel myself squeezing my hands on my jaw. I need to go take some time for myself. I'm going to go into the other room. I'm going to just go take some deep breaths and really bring myself down, because I'm not in a place right now to be able to really be my best self. And so I do that. I model that behavior a lot. Um, and I don't know. I think it's working. I think that we're all coming to a better space with it. I see my kids being able to, learn that language, and I think that that's what it's about, right? Like we're bringing our kids to a better understanding of emotional awareness, which I think is kind of a movement for mothers, for us to really teach what it means to take care of yourself.
Yeah, and just the idea of modeling and being able to normalize losing your shit, but then actually being able to talk about it and say, yeah, sometimes I lose my shit because life can be stressful, but then these are the things I do to help myself, and just talking to them, um, like the real humans they are. So essentially the opposite of do as I say, not as I do. The polar opposite of that, and just being able to be a real human being for your kids. Something I hear people talk about, or I've just heard, and thought about, is how a lot of people see their parents as like not real people when you're a kid, and then as you get older, they like fall off their pedestal and you realize like, oh wow, you're a real human that was just trying to raise other humans and do the best that you could, and you had your own programming and belief systems and experiences that led to your parenting style and maybe shortcomings of your own, right? And I feel like part of that is because of the culture around trying to not let your kids see you as a real person, whereas mindfulness and what you're talking about sounds more like allowing them to see you as a real person so that they can be free and being a real person, embracing their different emotions. And I think a lot of like the development of our shadow is kind of these repressed emotions we're not allowed to express. So it seems so powerful to be able to like allow your kids to express negative emotion, allow them to see you express negative emotion,
Right.
and deal with it in a healthy way. It's providing them more tools than to be like, mommy never gets upset, or like, now I'm just going to go chug my bottle of wine when you go to sleep, or
Right.
it's going to come out in other ways because I'm trying to present myself as this like perfect parent to children. And then they don't have the tools for communication, resolution, conflict resolution when they get older.
Well, yeah, and I think there is this, and I say, especially to my daughter all the time, I'm like, we're not shooting for perfection. I don't want you to be perfect. I'm not perfect. I show my flaws, and I think that there is this stress of perfection and it's like, what are we doing to ourselves? No one is perfect. Like, look out in nature. Like when we look at the flowers coming up, it's like we're not analyzing the petals. It's like you're just coming up and you're beautiful. And and it makes it like when we're, and my favorite people in the world are the ones that are raw and they're real and they're willing to just put it out there, and for us to embrace that within each other. We don't all need to be this perfect specimen, because when we all come together, it's like we click into each other and we all have our strengths, and then the other people, like, they bring their strengths to the table, and so we're all kind of lifting each other up.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, isn't that what it's all about?
Yeah, so good. That's wonderful to just embrace imperfection and also be vulnerable about those, because likely most people feel the same way about parenting. I have plenty of friends that have kids and they're like, "Oh my God, I just lost my shit today. I feel so bad." I'm like, I'm sure I'll lose my shit when I have kids.
Yeah. I didn't think I had a temper until I had children. Like, I'm a pretty even keel person. But talk about like healing your inner child and getting triggered by something and then being like, oh yeah, like that's why my mom was the way she was.
Yeah.
Oh, I get it now.
Yeah. You're like, oh, I forgive you that I was upset at you for that. I know. Yeah, it definitely seems like, and I'm so excited for the challenging aspects. I do think that it'll be a really unique opportunity for me to learn more about myself. And I always love hearing from other moms. And I can say, from my perspective, as somebody who doesn't have kids yet, to me, even you talking to me out on the podcast, but also outside of the podcast when we first met, and just being like, yeah, like, it's great, but it's this, and just talking about things in a realistic way. It's so much more relatable and approachable than people who, there's like the fear mongering people who are like, it's, oh my God, like buckle up, it sucks. And then there's like the people that are like, it's great. And you're like, well, I don't really appreciate either of these perspectives. Like, I want it to feel constructive and not just like, oh God, it's going to be like your life is over. But also, I know that it's going to be challenging.
Yeah.
And so that is what I appreciate about your like sense of humor and down to earth conversations regarding parenting, especially because I think a lot of times with things like mindfulness, they can get a very tied very up with spirituality. And I think spirituality gets kind of stereotyped in some ways as like pretentious or this certain aesthetic. And when in reality, I love looking at spirituality. Sorry, I got a little lunch break reminder. Um, if you could hear that. But yeah, I think it gets wrapped up in a way that can be kind of unapproachable sometimes. So just so refreshing to talk about mindfulness as like it's a tool that we have in our toolkit. It doesn't have to be perfect. It's just an effort in bringing more presence into our day, um, bringing like more quality interactions with the people in our lives and value to our experiences. So cool.
Yeah. Well, and we only have this moment. So, and it's like if we think about think about like scrolling through your phone, looking at old pictures, right? It's like each one of those is just capturing a moment, and it's like if we can take that time to connect ourselves to the present moment, what a gift, because here we are and this is what we have. Um, and
Mm,
it's kind of it. And I think that sometimes that's a little scary to think about, because it's like we don't know what the next moment will bring. And 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 it, with mindfulness, it's saying, well, that's okay, I can handle whatever it is, because like I'm handling it one moment at a time.
right. And always find too, embracing uncertainty allows for such more exciting possibility than trying to control everything. When you try to plan and control the future so much, you're actually eliminating a lot of room for possibilities that you aren't aware of, as opposed to kind of embracing uncertainty and this unique combination and blend of being still, surrendering, and also taking action
Mhm.
while being uncertain. And where that can take you is, for me, has always been much further, allowing for the unknown and variables than thinking that I can do it all myself.
Yeah. And that's really hard, um, for especially, I think, especially for moms, um,
Mm-hmm.
to let go of that control. And so, one thing that I got as great advice when I was pregnant with one of my
Lay it on
nieces,
me.
that she said to me, say I don't know to your partner as much as possible. And so it, like, when my husband would be like, some with a lot of those new things at the beginning, it's like you're probably going to do some of those new things with the baby first. You might have even like researched some of those things prior that your husband hasn't. And so, and being able to let go of the control and saying, I don't know, what do you think? And like giving the power back to them just from the very beginning, instead of at some point it builds up so much and then there's all this resentment to being like, why am I doing everything? It's like, well, you probably thought about it first and researched it first, because we have this, like, there's a lot of um you know, prior to having a baby, there's a lot of time when we have it fluttering inside of us to really, really process and think about it, which, like, it's just not physically the same. And so letting them, handing over the power, and saying,
Right.
I don't know, what do you think? So we have three mantras that we have used with parenting. And the first one is, everything is temporary. And so, like, that's like the mindfulness piece of it, right? Like, it's going to pass, whatever it may be, the good and the bad, it's going to pass. So, like, try to be where you are in that moment, because it's not going to be forever. The second one is, I'm doing my personal best. And so, and that every day that's going to look very different. And we would always relay that back and forth to each other, because, for one person doing something, it doesn't look that great. But if you reflect, if you say, I'm doing my personal best, it's like, this is the best that I can do in this moment. And then the third was, you do you. And so that was kind of like, I don't know, what do you think? And so there, we said that to each other all the time, where it's like, oh, well, like, should I, what, like, how do I do it with blah, 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 like, what should I be? It's like, you do, I trust you. You do you. I'm going to do me right now. You take care of this, and I trust you to do the best that you can.
Yeah. Oh, I love those. You're writing those on the whiteboard in the baby's room as a reminder. What you said too about empowering your partner, because I think it is something that happens often, where women are just more connected to the process earlier on because of the pregnancy. And it's just like, I mean, even with John's, like, it was like 6 months in, he's like, oh, you're actually pregnant, because it took so long to start showing, especially for the first one. And so you're going through a lot of like hormonal shifts, mental adjustments, emotions, your body's changing. And it's something in the first few months you don't even share with a lot of people. So people don't know. You're kind of not physically looking pregnant. And so you're dealing with a lot on your own. And so that can often be poured into, okay, I think I read like 5 books in the first trimester and I haven't read like any since. I'm like, okay, that's enough. Like,
Yeah, it's enough. It's
yeah,
enough.
gotta let it unfold now. Because I like, again, with everything else, there's a balance, right, between saturating yourself with information and then also just letting things unfold. There's variables you can't control, etc. But that's such a useful tip to be like, I don't know, what do you think? Or here, you look up, you research this area. And
Yeah.
I do feel lucky though that John is very involved and excited. And so I think it's awesome when you can both come together and be excited together and be tackling the different areas you are excited about. But
Right,
I
right. Well,
definitely have been like putting books on his nightstand table. I'm like, read this, read this. He's like, okay, chill out. You already told me what that entire book says over the past month. I feel like I had it on audiobook because you won't shut up about hypnobirthing or like whatever. He's like, do I really have to read it at this point? But
what more is this going to give me?
yeah, he's like, can you just tell me like what I would be missing from what you've already regurgitated? He's like, I get it. You want me to read the book. I'm like, oh yeah, don't forget, it's over there. It's right there. If you missed it, he's like, I
You're like,
haven't.
I'll turn the pages for you.
He wakes up and I'm just sitting over him with the front page open. Hello, chapter 1, hypnobirthing. Have you read this page? Okay, are you ready for the next page? Like, so.
The mental load is wild. It's just like you just don't even know how many more things you're adding until it's like I did a practice recently where I like sat down with my journal and wrote down all of the things that I was thinking about. And it wasn't like it wasn't about work. It was just about like mothering. And
Mhm.
I just, oh my God, I got to the end of it and I was like, no shit, I'm stressed. Like, of course, like, look at all these things I'm trying to balance right now. And it was so validating for me to be like, oh, of course I'm feeling this way. Of course I'm,
Mhm.
it's a lot. It's a lot. And so having that time to take a step back and like just be like, well, why am I feeling all of these things in my body? Like, why, where is this all coming from? And
Mhm.
taking that time for yourself to get to the root of it and saying, this is a lot. And yeah, like, yes, I feel this way. And and I should feel this way because it's a lot. And let me breathe through it and be able to figure out like, what can I control and what can I not control? And being able to sort it a little bit is helpful.
Yeah, and it's so I've observed that things like meditation or even things like a morning routine or stuff like this, obviously I know it's more challenging in motherhood and parenting in general, and just the more we have going on in our lives, the more of a negotiable it seems like, okay, this can go, get rid of this so I can focus on channeling all my energy into things I need to do. And so it seems like a luxury sometimes to build in these practices of self-care, when in reality, when you take a step back and realize that it's actually probably increasing your productivity to take 10 minutes a day. It's actually probably improving the way that you carry yourself throughout the day. It's probably improving the quality of your interactions. It's probably improving your creativity and imagination for entrepreneurship or whatever you're doing. It's probably improving your overall well-being physiologically. There's so many benefits of taking time for mindfulness, slowing down, stepping into the parasympathetic nervous system. So it's like, is it really a negotiable to spend 10 minutes a day to like do something that has such a positive impact on so many areas? And ways of operating in the world. And so to me, that's kind of how I always justify it, where I'm like, oh, I have so much to do. But it's like, well, do you want to be doing it from like a frantic fight or flight energy all day? Or do you want to take like 5 to 10 minutes so that you can come at it from this place of balance and like efficiency and presence and calm, which I think we really minimize the importance of in our society. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, crazy.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
yeah.
I also teach 7th and 8th grade English, and so
Mhm.
there's so many kids who come to me that are so stressed and anxious, and we do a lot of work where it's just like, okay, you're not going we can't be productive. We can't learn if we're just in this fight or flight mode and we're just kind of like pinging all over the place. It's like the first thing you have to do is quiet and bring it down 10 notches. And
Mhm.
um I think that this is common for a lot of relationships, the amount of time that men allow themselves to be in the bathroom. And I think like sometimes that's the only place that I can find peace, and sometimes I'll be in there and my kids will be like sliding notes underneath the bathroom door to, like that they need me, or they think that they do. And like in a different scenario, I would, unlock the door and run out immediately, and I'm like, but you know what, like this is the only sacred space that I have, and I'm going to take this time to, instead of scrolling on my phone for 3 minutes, I'm going to use some of my techniques to center myself again and bring myself to be able to open up that door and be a little bit a better piece of
Yeah.
myself.
Right. Tolerance is higher, patience is higher. So even though they might not get what they want immediately, they don't know it, but they're getting what they need long term by you being able to show up as a more stabilized version of yourself.
Yeah, more stabilized, not like stable, but
More stable. Yeah, not stable. That would be boring. So,
just
oh my God, I feel like we could talk about this shit all day, but I do want to ask a couple more questions before I let you share where people can find you.
okay.
I know we were talking about this before we hopped on, but and how like mindfulness and awareness can play such a huge role in the evolution of our relationships. And when talking about personal development overall, we were
Mm.
talking about the challenges of relationships when you're going through your own personal growth or shifts. And so I wanted to just ask, what are your thoughts on how mindfulness can be a supportive tool along our own personal development path?
So we're always growing and evolving, and hopefully for the better, but we have 2 steps forward, 2 steps back in life. And using mindfulness is a way to quiet yourself and to bring yourself inward, to kind of take inventory on the things that are serving you. And I say things, but I also mean people who are serving you in your life. And we think about we want to surround ourselves with what brings us joy and what lifts us up. And I think that sometimes, when we are evolving into someone new or some new stage of our lives, it's you have to take stock of what is serving you. And that can be the people around you, maybe the food that you eat, your daily routines, like what your rituals, all of those pieces. And I think for using mindfulness as a tool, it helps to kind of quiet everything else, to clarify like what is bringing me to my best self. And so it's kind of like, for me, it's this baseline piece that when I can use it to not feel like everything is rattling, to feel like things are a little bit more categorized, and I can see like what is serving me and what isn't. And then you can use it to hopefully take the step in the direction that you want to take.
Yeah. Yeah, I think of it similarly to so many habits where you're trying to build these healthy habits and they can slip. And in slipping, sometimes things that maybe aren't as a lot in mindfulness slipping or presence slipping or awareness or consciousness, maybe we kind of start engaging in habits that aren't serving us best or kind of going back to old habits or autopilot, and that it just returns us to that level of self-awareness, like you said, to ask what's serving us best, really getting honest, not only about like the external environment in our lives with everything you talked about, but also the internal environment of like, what stories are we telling ourselves?
Mhm.
What things have impacted us that we're carrying with us and allowing to like dictate our life moving forward, and kind of the inner work as well as like cultivating an environment externally too.
Yeah, and letting things move through you, you know, it's like we have to feel our feels, and there's no one in this world that does not feel malice or hatred or regret. Like those things they make us human, and when we can take the time to let them move through us instead of fighting it or numbing it, it it allows us to be in the moment and not be thinking about the past or worrying about the future.
Yeah, totally. Such a good tool. I know it's something that I talk about often, is like sitting through the discomfort of like consciously facing things for the first time so that you can get to the other side and be more comfortable ultimately without having to escape through like self-medicating or distractions or toxic relationships or food or whatever it may be that your escape of choice is. Some people just like to constantly busy
Right.
themselves, or
Yeah,
like you
that's the
said,
poison.
move on, yeah, move on to the next thing or whatever,
Mhm.
to distract themselves from the inner work aspects of their life that they're not satisfied with, all of that stuff. And so yeah, and overall I just feel like such a useful tool in our world today, because seems like there's a lot of people where the world can be like harsh or toxic, and even with social media, people like saying like whatever they want on it just seems like there's such a lack of connection um in our common humanity sometimes, where mindfulness can really bring us back to like, hey, we're all humans, like everyone has their collective experience that's made them who they are, and we have a lot more in common than we don't. And if you actually take time to be present, I think it has such a powerful impact on our interpersonal relationships, how we treat each other. Like you said in the beginning, kindness is just, it's hard to be like a mindful asshole, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably possible.
Fossils. No, I'm just kidding. But I feel like, yeah, it's like hard to be present and then like go be super rude to like the waitress at the restaurant, or
Yeah,
like troll someone on social media, or argue with someone about their political views. It's just like, I don't need you to think like me. And
no.
so,
Well,
and I
and that's
think,
and it's like it's like that's your stuff.
yeah,
This is I when you're good here, it's like you're not searching for other people to engage in. It's like you've got that. You don't need it. You don't you don't need the other stuff to
right.
make you feel better because you're feeling it internally, and that's really, man, what a gift.
I know. And such an opportunity to like realize what you are projecting to other people too, when you have your own bullshit and you're like, oh, wow, yeah, this is my own scarcity mindset, or this is my own experience growing up that's like really triggering me now. And a lot of times, if we don't do that, they like operate on autopilot and we project our own beliefs onto people. And it can really shape our relationships without realizing that it's like our own shortcomings.
Hmm.
But yeah, before we wrap up, tell me, what is your number one kind of piece of advice? I know you had talked a lot about modeling, but I wanted to say like down to earth parenting tips. We have mantras, we have modeling. What else do you think? Especially for me personally, I'd love to, as a new mom. So for people who are new moms and trying to be mindful throughout their motherhood journey,
Yeah.
what are your thoughts?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, okay, the best motherhood mindfulness tip. For myself, it was um, finding a meditation app that I could put on. Because when people are always like, "Oh, sleep when the baby sleeps," do that, and everyone's like, "Oh," but I tried, especially with my first. Once I had my second, it was a little bit harder. But when those naps came around for her, I used a meditation app to also take a nap. And it would, because my practice I had already had that within it, I used it, and it really did like settle me to that I could get the sleep that I need, because sleep is life.
Hmm.
And you we know that sleep deprivation is used for forms of torture. And so
Yeah.
like if you and sleep is healing. And so when you find something that it's because it's like we're all exhausted.
Hmm.
That's not the issue. Is not the exhaustion. The issue is like when a lot of people, when they lay down, they're looking and thinking about all of the things that they have to do or that they should do. And it's like, if you can find some app, like find one that you like the sound of their voice and it calms you, and then use that tool for nap time to really just still the waters and bring you back to that moment, because your baby
Hmm.
is doing that. So if you can as well, man, it is a gift.
Match the vibe, come back restored. And even if you don't fall asleep, hey, at least you're getting a meditation out of it at the very least.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So crushing it. Yeah. Awesome. Well, I also wanted to wrap up by just asking you where people can find you. I know these don't always air like immediately. It'll be a few weeks before this one comes out, but so no specific dates, but where can people find you for any offerings you have, any things you are doing?
Yeah. So my website is quietmindwildheart.com.
Mm-hmm.
I'm doing virtual appointments. So it's 6 to 10 weeks of working one-on-one. I also have an office downtown in Market Square in Portsmouth on Tuesdays. So I'm doing in-persons on Tuesdays with clients. And then also we can always meet in the woods if that is the place that you find your peace.
I love that. It sounds like slightly creepy, but I like it. We can always meet in the woods if you want. It's just the right brand of creepy that I love.
We can
um,
coffee first, so so no one
I love Well, it's so fun having you. You're hilarious and so fun and easy to talk to. And so, if anyone is interested in learning more about mindfulness based stress reduction, you know where to find Katie. And as always, if you enjoyed this episode, you should share it or comment or let us know, what resonated with you, what you'd like to hear more about, all those things. And thanks for listening. Bye.
Thanks, Katie. Bye.
Bye.